Hi, welcome to another edition of Hooks and Ladders. My name is Blair Packham,
My name is Allister Bradley.
and we're both songwriters. And what we're doing here is talking about songwriting, talking about specific aspects of songwriting, our experiences. And I hope that what we talk about is relatable to what you do as well. Maybe you're a newbie, maybe you're a veteran songwriter, but we're talking about all kinds of things that interest us about songwriting. And actually, I don't know about you, Allister, for me, that's just about everything to do with songwriting.
Just about everything. And yeah, whether you're new to songwriting or you've written 1,000 songs, maybe you sit back and your reaction is either, oh, I'll try that, or, oh, I recognize that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, one of the things I'm curious about, and I don't know the answer, it's an open-ended question. How do you know a song is finished? I mean, for you, Allister, how do you know when you've written a song and it's done?
That's a hard question to answer. It seems like it might be an easier feeling to feel that, okay, I feel like I've done everything I can to this. So maybe that's the way I approach it, is I'm working, I'm refining, I'm rewriting until that point where I feel like everything in the song seems to be pointed in the right direction. It seems to be doing what I want it to do. That's not to say that I haven't mistakenly finish some songs, and yet they still have one of those temporary lines in them. But most of the time, I catch those, and I go through it with a fine-tooth comb. I do things very iteratively. I'm not capable of starting at the beginning and working through sort of the chronological evolution of the song from time 0 to time 330. And get everything right in that order. I do the broad strokes, and then I come back and I refine and I polish. But there does come a point where I feel that, okay, I wouldn't change anything in this song.
Right, right. Well, you're lucky because I don't experience that. I really don't. I will experience a feeling of, okay, I think that's good enough. I mean, what is good enough in my brain at that moment? I think what is good enough is it saying what I want it to say? Is it not misdirecting anybody to some other meaning? I try to not write like really didactically, like really specifically pointing the listener. I try and leave some room, but it's hard because I usually have a pretty specific idea about what I'm trying to say. So I want to make sure it says that. And yet there are songs, for me, the answer is I don't know when a song is finished, even after it's been recorded and released. I can think of a bunch of examples going back many years where I would rewrite the lyric right now, except I sort of feel like, yeah, but there are new songs to write. So, I want to get to those. And,
Yes. Yeah, I can
but I mean,
relate to that as well.
I was in a band. We've talked about this before. I was in a band in the '80s called the Jitters, and we had a record deal, and we put out records. We put out 2 albums on a major label, and it was a great time in my life in certain ways. But in one way, it wasn't, which was I didn't, particularly on the first album, I wasn't so careful about lyrics, and now I've got to live. There's a song, for instance, that was a hit, a Canadian hit, granted. So it's one of those hits that you can sing along to, and you might even know the title, but you can't remember who did it. That would be that would be I'm not even going to name it because I don't really want to like tear apart one of my own songs that was out on the radio and people seem to like it. But the bridge is terrible, like really terrible. And I pride myself. I write a good bridge. There's no question. I mean, to me, there's no question to me. A bridge is supposed to be a breath of fresh air. A bridge is supposed to be a change, and this bridge does that musically, but lyrically it's terrible, like laughably terrible. So that when the Jitters get together about once a year these days, and we play, and when we play that song, I always crack up when we get to the bridge because I just cannot believe how terrible the words are. Now, but I've got other songs since then, same thing, and yet at the time they seemed like, okay, I can go with this. So for me, yeah, it's not a simple thing.
It's funny though, because I can have the feeling that the song is finished, and then I can have that experience later where I wish I had done something more to it. And it's only because I look at it with the fresh eyes later, and whether that's a week later or 10 years later or 30 years later, and I say, oh, you know what? I could have done this with it. But in the moment, that thought never occurred to me. And that's one of the funny things about songwriting, isn't it? We're making choices. We're creating from nothing. And it seems to us in the moment that, well, I only have two choices. I've either got to do this here or this here. But there's that third and fourth and fifth choice that we just didn't come up with. Maybe if we'd been in the room writing with a particular songwriter, they would have said, well, what about if he was standing on his head? I never thought of that. So sometimes these thoughts do come to me after the fact, after I've recorded the song, after I've released the song. Yes, indeed. And I have to sort of just get comfortable with the idea that, I'm going to move on and write new songs.
I think that is important. I mean, perfectionism is the killer of creativity. It really is. If it has to be just so every time, you're never going to release anything. You're never going to finish anything. But this discussion, it actually brings up a couple of other things. One of them being, how do you develop that aesthetic? How do you know? How do you get to know? Even if you don't know, as I've said about my own songs, that it's done, but that it would be okay to move on, because it's saying more. Like, how do you develop that? And I think it's through paying careful attention, what I call critical listening, where you're listening to other people, songs you love, and importantly, songs you hate, and asking yourself why. Why do I hate that song? Your answer can't be because, so-and-so is an idiot. That isn't good enough. It's not helpful anyway. You have to understand why it's not working for you musically or lyrically or arrangement-wise even. Why that thing bugs you, or why that thing makes your heart soar when you hear that song, why it makes you feel so good. Try to figure that stuff out, and then applying it to your own writing, I think, is hugely valuable.
Yes. And there are some practical tips that can help us get in that mind space of being critical. When we're writing and we've been alone in the room with this song for days or weeks or months, and we're so intimately familiar with the song, it's like a forest in the trees situation. We can't see how this looks to someone else because we're so close to it. And yet there are some simple things we can do to try and get out of that headspace. One of them, the greatest one perhaps, is get up on stage and play it to somebody. And if you're looking for a safe environment to do that, not your CD release party when the song can't be changed. Well, is there an open mic, or is there a local jam where you could play it to strangers and see whether they seem to have any reaction to the song? And not a reaction to you as a performer, because we've met singer-songwriters who have the most gorgeous voices, and they're easy on the eyes, and they get up on stage and it doesn't matter what they sing or play, an audience is moved. But after the performance, that audience will typically say things like, "I love your voice, man," or "Can I get a selfie with you, man?" But they're not going to say anything about, "Oh, when you sang about swans, oh, I just melted."
That line about such and such.
If they say that, they're in the song and not just in the performance. But that experience of being up on stage and performing your song for somebody else, it not only gives you a chance to observe whether there was any reaction from the audience, but suddenly you are so aware of anything in the song that might be a little clunky as it comes out of your mouth, as you play it on your guitar with your fingers. Suddenly there's this awareness that wasn't there before. So it's a great tool.
Stand-up comics do this. They and I'm talking like the most famous of the famous successful stand-up comics like Jerry Seinfeld or Chris Rock, people like that. They call it working out, and they will go to a club on a weeknight, a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, or whatever. And I'm sure the comics who are on the bill normally would get annoyed by this, because Jerry Seinfeld shows up and wants to do a 15-minute set. And that cuts into your, time there. I'm sure it's annoying to you. But the fact is, they do that to work out material. And I've heard Chris Rock say that he he doesn't even give them full Chris Rock. He doesn't go into his full character, where he's really like, really high energy and so forth. He doesn't do that. He just is sort of laying out the jokes to see what the reaction is, and he's testing it. And if people are laughing and he's not giving them full Chris Rock, because you have to believe that if he gives them full Chris Rock, they're going to laugh, But working it out like that, and I think that that's a really valid thing to do, and particularly to not just play the songs for your loved ones, your mom. They're going to love what you do. They're going to say, "That's great, honey. Good for you, sweetie," or whatever. And that's not really going to tell you anything. It'll be good for your ego, and it'll help you continue. And that's important too. There's no question. But in terms of it getting better, it's not going to help.
Yeah. Although I do want to point out, my wife Karen is the best critical listener. In fact, I'll play her something, and rather than just saying, "Oh, that's nice," she'll say, "It's not your best," or she'll say, "It's not quite there yet." And even when I play her something and I'm asking for her opinion on the recording and the mixing, not just the songwriting, she'll say, "You know what? I'm being distracted by this instrument. It's taking me away."
Right. Well, that's great to have.
She's capable of doing that. And not all music listeners can point at the thing that's irritating them, but there's something in there that could be irritating them. So I have that.
That's where critical listening comes back in. So Karen has clearly developed that when it comes to your songwriting, which is great. She may resent it ultimately. We'd have to talk to her, because it may cause her to listen to other people's songs that way as well, which does take away some of your enjoyment of music. When you're learning to listen critically, it can kind of ruin things, because you'll be listening to, some song that you thought was the greatest song and you used to dance to it and you used to sing along, and now you're singing along and you're going, "What did they say? That's a stupid line," and it can kind of ruin things. You got to come out the other side. And one of the things you have to recognize is, for all this talk about songwriting and rewriting and technique and rhyme schemes and structure and all the things that you and I talk about all the time, the bottom line is the song has to make people feel something. Ideally, it has to make you feel something, and then other people, and you're helping transmit that feeling. That's the bottom line. That's the function of a song, in my thinking anyway. Yes.
There's another trick that comes to mind. Pat Pattison brought this to my attention. He calls it the room test, and the way he describes it as, this works best if you can put yourself physically in a room that is fairly large, your living room, or, not just your bathroom, but stand at one end of the room and sing your lyric to the opposite wall, to a distant wall. And there's something psychologically that happens that, again, gives you a sudden awareness of the parts of the song that aren't making it all the way across the room, the parts of the song that are somehow weaker than other parts. And it's just an awareness test. It could allow me to hear parts of my song that, wow, that actually is so easy to be misheard as something I don't want people to hear. I used a word that sounds just like another word. It could be, oh, I can see how somebody would get to this point in the song and just say, "I don't get it." So
right. I think that's fantastic advice from Pat Pattison. That's terrific advice. It's really what he's saying is, I think, is being able to step outside yourself for a moment, and you're facilitating that by singing to the other wall. Singing the other end of the room, and I think that's really important, because we can be very self-congratulatory when we're creating, because it's magic. There's no question to me that it's magic. I mean, you could find other words for it, but for me, it feels magical. The act of coming up with an idea and then fleshing it out. The rewriting and the editing, not magic. There is magic to be found in there, but it feels more like work. Which is why I have a lot of ideas kicking around that I haven't finished, because it's a lot of work to finish them. I think that we need to step outside ourselves in order to kind of escape the magic for a moment and have a harder, colder look at the way something might be working.
Yes. Not to bring Pat Pattison's name into this conversation too much, because we are educators as well. But one thing that he says on that regard is, he says, consider that, the two forces at work here. There is the purely creative, he calls it the swamp monster, that just, burps out, content. And then there is the scientist in the lab coat who, picks and chooses between the bits that are left on the sidewalk there and says, oh, this is good, but that I'll leave behind. But he does say that those two forces are equally important in this process, but he says never let them in the room at the same time. So don't get out of that wonderful creative space to put yourself in a critical space. Enjoy that creative time until you feel like, okay, this moment is over. I'm done. I've satisfied that creative moment. I've done the work. And then you can get outside of that space and you can look at it with fresh eyes.
I've heard lots of writers say that. Don't edit yourself as you go. I've always edited myself as I go. And I suppose if I then said, and these gold records are proof that I'm successful, but I don't have that punchline. I mean, I've had stuff on the radio and I've written stuff for TV that you might know, but I've thought a lot about this stuff. And I think that, much in the way a song can come from anywhere and can happen in any way. There's no one way to write. I do think the editing as you go is a way that works for me. However, I can see easily how it wouldn't work for most people. It's just the way my brain tends to work. So I agree with him and with people who say that you should try and keep those acts separate if you can. But, sometimes you write something and you just know it's crappy, like the line that you wrote, but it doesn't mean the whole idea is crappy. It's just that line is a filler. Those are dummy words, and they're put in there to fill space until you can think of something better. Yes. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with editing as I go. But I wrote with Alanis Morissette. She didn't edit a thing as she went at all. She just started. She was so open and so free, and I envy that. I would love to be like that. She just spewed it out there, and it was good stuff. It was really good stuff. So, just as there is no one way to write a song, there's no one way to approach the editing of it as well. And yeah. Well, I think we should probably wrap up. But when is a song finished is the eternal question. I've got ideas from literally 30 years ago. I've got mostly written songs that aren't finished, and I've released stuff that I feel like could use a rewrite. So I suppose you have to develop your critical listening and your inner aesthetic to figure it out.
And decide for yourself when you're comfortable calling it finished and not let anybody else tell you otherwise.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's true. Certainly not once you've spent money releasing the song. At a certain point, you got to let go, right? You just have to let go. We're going to let go right now. This is Hooks and Ladders. I'm Blair Packham, and that is Allister Bradley, and we look forward to talking to you again quite soon.